those diehard folks who are optimistic, y'all. People say hoping that the person will change. Right? I'm here. I know I done prayed about it. I done talked to God about it. You done everything you can, hoping that this person will change. And hope becomes your destination, right? We hold out and focusing on what their partner could be, right? Not who they consistently are. I'm hoping that he's going to change. And then you actually find yourself believing that you can have a role in a decision that they make to do better and to be better. So hope. I love hope. I think hope is important, but hope alone is not going to change or remedy that. Have you ever been in a relationship where you knew it was over? You knew that there was so much conflict, so much disagreement that it really has just reached a point where, you're screaming, I'm out of here, but yet you managed to stay. Or have you ever been in a situation where you're on the verge of violence or the communication in the relationship has just gotten so bad? Now, you know in your mind that this relationship is over. Now, I'm posing this because I know a lot of people in all the work that I do, I'm talking about strengthening families and I'm talking about keeping marriages and relationships going. And that's all part of the strengths perspective. But in reality, there are times when a relationship reaches a point where it's really not in the best interest of anyone to remain in that relationship. So today I'm going to kind of unpack one of the more complex and really misunderstood issues in human relationships. And that is why people choose to remain in toxic and unhealthy relationships. Now, from a clinical standpoint, this is not an issue of weakness. In actuality, it's more of a psychological issue. It centers around matters sometimes of attachment or even issues of trauma. Some people actually stay associated with matters of trauma. And then, of course, there's some system barriers that kind of keep people together. Well, research shows when we really began to examine it and look at it that actually people stay in relationships for a combination of issues, emotional and what they call cognitive and social meaning, social and economic factors that people stay in relationships. And so the truth is, there really is no simple one reason why people stay in this relationship. But what I'm going to unpack today, I'm really going to say that I need you to listen because some of these issues that I'm going to identify, just some reasons, 7 to 10 reasons why I think people stay in these toxic and unhealthy relationships. But I'm not going to leave you there because I'm going to turn around and add and talk about why we need to change and how you need to change. I think all of that is important. So pull up a chair, tune in, don't change the button, get someone involved, be prepared to share this discussion because you may know someone who is in one of these unhealthy relationships. And so let's just kind of go through them. And you tell me if it resonates with you, like it, share it, add a comment so we can build in the community of helping people understand why they stay in these relationships. Now, here are some reasons. The first one, and they're not in any particular order, but the first one I'm going to say is that some people stay in these toxic relationships for something known as trauma bonding, right? The trauma bonding is a cycle of abuse followed by affection, creating a powerful emotional attachment and similar kind of addictions. That means, another way of putting it, you come from a world of trauma and she or he comes from a world of trauma, and somehow y'all shared trauma, you find yourself connected in that regard. Now, that's not unusual. One of the things we see even in the world of addiction, we see sometimes people who are in treatment form relationships around that addiction, around that treatment. And then as soon as they get out, now they're clean, then the relationship tends to crumble. But when that's not an issue, the trauma bonding, we pay attention to it because we have a shared experience. She knows your trauma, you know her trauma, and you all are somehow connected to it. And so the trauma bonding or that intermittent reinforcement of that behavior is what becomes problematic. That means that an incident occurs, there's a conflict, there's the makeup or the bonding or the repairing, and then everything, the emotions calm down, and then the trauma bonding cycle, it begins to build up right back again. You know, there's some old school, so I'm gonna just hang around this one for a second. There's some old school songs that actually, if you kind of think about it, Anita Baker said, we used to break up to make up. Al Green said, why'd somebody choose to break up and turn around and make up? Old Jays, one of those, my favorite songs, he said, and we cried together, and then we made love throughout the night. All of this kind of speaks sometimes to a cycle that we began to see. So trauma bonding is the first one that you take inventory for yourself or your friends. Now, there are other reasons too. Some people stay in these toxic relationships because of low self-esteem and the internalized worthlessness. Now, really, you take an inventory for yourself on this one. That means that you have been in this emotionally draining and sometimes emotionally abusive relationship for so long that you have now began to devalue yourself. That means that your partner may have been engaged in this form of emotional abuse, challenging your worthlessness. Now, all of a sudden, you began to question your own worthiness. And so this low self-esteem that you began to buy in, and what begins to happen from that is that you believe, right, that you don't deserve any better. And so you say, well, this is my situation, my condition, and then you take a position that, look, I don't deserve better. This is what I get. I had the baby with him, or I had the baby with her, so this is where I am. And so now your self-esteem and your internalized worthlessness becomes your sticking point. Am I resonating with you yet? How about this? Fear of being alone. Now, I run a group every Saturday morning, a family violence group. These are men who are court ordered to family violence. And the question that I asked them in my class this morning, it was a really good question. I asked those men, right? We're talking about 10 men. I say, why do men choose to stay in toxic, unhealthy relationships? Now, that's a really good, honest question for all these men who are in this class because they didn't leave. These are men who, instead of dealing with this issue in this relationship, it resulted in some form of violence. And so when I pose to these men, why did you choose to remain in a toxic relationship? And that's a fair question, because every one of them, when you sign them up, and we have to understand the situation that got them there, most of these men actually, the description of the victim, the woman, is that it's matters of toxicity. Now, I run a women's group, incidentally, for clarity, I run a women's group on Friday evening, and there the same question was posed. And what was amazing is that I got similar responses, but why people remain in the relationship. And one that was very common was the fear of being alone. Loneliness often feels more threatening than dysfunction. And so that's an honest, sobering thing for some people saying, I got him or I got her, this is where we are. And you know what? I don't feel like doing this thing all over again, and I don't want to be left alone. And that's a hard one for brothers to digest. That the problem is you stay in these unhealthy relationships because you don't want to be alone. Now, in one of my other podcasts, I talk about this thing called a hobosexual. That's right, H-O-B-O, hobosexual. Y'all need to check that podcast out. But even there, it's talking about men who are going for sequential relationships from one relationship to the next and to the next. And again, what undergirds all of that is the fear of being alone. That's a tough pill, brothers. If you're watching this, you would take an inventory of yourself. Can you handle being by yourself? Sisters, this is a particularly tough one for you too, is that, are you happy with yourself? Can you find happiness being alone? Or are you dependent on being with someone even to the point of dysfunction? So fear of being alone is an honest inventory. Again, y'all, I just want to be clear here that these are not weaknesses. And I don't want you all to take them or process this as being a form of weakness, because it's not. but it's an honest critique of what kind of goes on in our mind. Now, number four in this regard, or one of the reasons why people choose to stay in the toxic relationship, is financial dependence and economic barriers, right? The lack of resources, housing, or income traps people in this place. Now, everyone who studies family violence, everyone who studies the cycle of violence, or what's referred to as the Duluth model of violence, one of the categories here is financial or economic dependence. That means you choose to stay in the relationship. Why? Because to be on your own, you can't afford this house. You can't afford the car note. You can't afford all these bills to be by yourself. So you've gotten yourself in a dependent situation, and then you conclude that you can't leave. And so it's a concern. And I say this, and I'm talking to a man, you're talking to someone that has all daughters. You know, the notion of independence is a compliment or an enhancing. Not that I'm telling you to be prepared to leave, but what I am saying is that one of the reasons people stay in that toxic relationship, because not realizing it, they found themselves in being economically dependent. And so this here is probably one of the ones that resonates more than anything that I tend to see when we are examining these relationships. And for some of you, you have friends that you know that are in unhealthy relationships. Some of them you've actually witnessed the toxicity. And you turn around and say, man, why are you still with her? Or you're asking, if he's doing all of that, why are you still with him? I need y'all to listen to the answer. Don't let it gloss over. Don't let them talk in the codes, girl. I just know. Get the clarity. I don't want you to berate them or treat them as it's a form of weakness, but I do want you to pause, really seeking to understand their thinking. Now, another reason is that people will stay in these relationships also is because you got kids, right? Co-parenting, custody fears, and family disruption complicates this. And so this is the one that we hear people often say, I'm staying together for the kids. That is a very common form of self-talk, that you are staying in an unhealthy relationship because you're doing it for the kids. Now, y'all zoom in. I'm going to let y'all in on a little secret. I'm going to ask you this question. Which is better, for a child to be in a healthy home with a single parent where there's co-parenting, or a child to be in a two-parent home that's highly conflictual, unhealthy in that regard? If you think about that, your answer should say, in the best interest of the child, it's better for that child to be in a home where you have a single parent, but it's healthy. Now, so I know some of you brothers going to challenge me. Y'all going to give pushback, but guess what? Give me the comments. I'm ready for it. I'm going to tell you right now, when we think about the best interests of the child, it's not in their best interest to grow up asking and witnessing their parents' conflict and name call and yell and scream. So it, as a justification that we're doing it for the kids, is a common one, and it actually makes sense from an emotional standpoint. But it's not in the best interest of the child. But that's why people stay. And for those diehard folks who are optimistic, y'all, people say hoping that the person will change. Right? I'm here. I know I done prayed about it. I done talked to God about it. You done everything you can, hoping that this person will change. And hope becomes your destination. Right? We hold out and focusing on what their partner could be, right? Not who they consistently are. I'm hoping that he's going to change. And then you actually find yourself believing that you can have a role in a decision that they make to do better and to be better. So hope. I love hope. I think hope is important, but hope alone is not going to change or remedy that. Now, some people, another reason people will stay in these toxic relationships is fear of retaliation or the escalation of abuse. So everyone in the family violence world, everyone knows that the truth is, the research shows that a person in a violent relationship will leave and come back up to 12 times before they finally leave. So this one here, this is why I said it's not a form of weakness. Leaving can be the most dangerous at times decisions that you can make, and some people just don't want the smoke. And so they'll choose to stay and endure it. And you take that fear of retribution with that hope that, maybe if I do it, as long as he's not drinking, as long as she's on her medication. So we start holding out for the hope, and we start have that fear of retribution. You all, I know these are uncomfortable. I know these are some pieces that you that maybe not settle well or fit well with you, but I'm going to tell you to hang in, because this may not pertain to you, and it may very well be, but I guarantee you there is someone in your circle that these typologies that I'm giving you, just send it to your friend. Send this link to your friend and say, just take a look at it. People stay in relationships that are toxic because of emotional dependency and this thing called love. Now, isn't that an interesting thing, that love can override logic? Oh no, y'all missed that. I'm saying love can override logic, creating what we call a cognitive dissonance between what one feels and what one knows. That's what a cognitive dissonance is. What you say and what you feel is in direct conflict with what is right in before you. And so this cognitive dissonance, we say we're doing it in the name of love, but the true definition of love has nothing to do with violence. It has nothing to do with toxicity. But we will write off and redefine love as a justification for staying together. And so I know these are a lot, but I have taken the time to go through each one of these. I mean, there's some recommendations for change, and we're not going to take that off the table. So y'all hold tight. I'm going to give you the recommendations for change, but I just want to make sure that what I'm covering, everyone has an opportunity to look at it. People stay in unhealthy relationships, concerns for their partners, feelings, right? And research shows, think about this, that people will stay because they don't want to hurt their partner, or they don't want to watch that partner unhealthy. And some partners will even give the threat of hurting themselves. And so we'll stay out of concern for the partner. Again, this is all the self-talk. These are all the justifications that we create for ourselves. And there's a sunken place. There's another reason too, right? I call it the sunk cost fallacy, right? People stay because they've already invested significant time, energy, and emotion in making this thing work. So that's the language. Here's an example. Man, everything got to put in this relationship. I know he doing this. I know he cheating. I know she goes through all this. I know she'll cuss me out. But you know what? We've been together for so long. I didn't put so much into this thing, man. To idea of going out again? No, dog, I'm good. I'll stay and swim in this dysfunctional state. So that's the sunken cost. That's or the sunken place that you fall into, and then you recycle. And if you're not careful, you actually develop a level of trauma that even kind of falls from that. So childhood trauma becomes other reasons that we see my mom and daddy divorce, and I watch what happened, and I watch my mom and dad divorce, and I saw everything they go through. I don't want that for my kids, and I don't want to go through that. And so we then reflect on our own childhood traumas, and we then use them as an excuse or the justification for not ourselves being through it. And some people go, you know, I knew that when I got married, I didn't want to get divorced. I saw my parents go through it, or my parents stayed happily married and they were together, and I don't want to be a failure. And so we take these traumas and we then use these traumas as our justification. And so the last one I'm going to give you all is the religious people. Some folks, depending on their religion, divorce is wrong. Some folks, depending on religion, you might be engaged in domestic violence or toxicity, and you go to the imam or you go to the elder, and the elder tell y'all to work it out, and now you're relying on the elder or whoever that religious leader is who have created a justification, what thus saith the Lord, about you remaining in a domestic violence or a toxic relationship. So these pieces here, I'm telling you that I actually gave y'all 13 of them. So if you know somebody, you look at those pieces, those are real. But what I'm going to tell you is that there are some recommendations, some things I need you to do to change, to either get out of this situation or to change the situation. But we have to pause and begin to take a look at what you need to do to purge yourself of this toxicity that's in your life, and very well the life that you're exposing your children to. So very short, very quickly, rebuild self-worth through therapy. I'm going to tell you that one of the forms of therapy that's really good when people are, the way they're processing their thinking, cognitive behavior therapy, which when we say cognitive, that's your thought process, how you think, how you focus, and then the behavior that follows that line of thinking. So cognitive behavior therapy and trauma-informed approaches to therapy help us challenge what we call the distorted beliefs. That notion is I deserve this or I can't do better. So therapy is number one. I got 3 more here, right? 4 more. Develop a safety plan to exit. So some of those I told you about where people were hesitant about leaving because of fear of retribution or escalations of argument. I'm going to tell you, when you're in a toxic relationship. So just because you develop an exit plan, that doesn't mean that you immediately implement it. I'm saying that when your belly gets full of all the trauma and all the abuse, when your belly and your emotion, your spirit reaches a point where it's at the breaking point, I want you to have that exit plan, right? That means, number 3, strengthen your social network. Don't keep this what you're going through secret from anyone else. When you strengthen your social network, you're breaking the isolation that allows the toxicity to remain. That means you're giving a public face like y'all got it together, but you know what happens when y'all get in the car. You know what happens when y'all are alone. So strengthen your social network. Talk to someone, make someone aware, because actually you may need that strength, that support from a family member, a best friend, to aid you in eliminating the toxicity or removing yourself from the toxic relationships. Also, number 4 of the 5 is name the pattern, right? This psychoeducational approach here, that naming it, understanding that trauma bonding, gaslighting, and abuse cycles reduce the self-blame and increases clarity. So you name it. When you can begin to name those patterns, that I am bonding with the trauma, when we can name it, this is a cycle that I'm in. When you can name, I do tend to blame myself, even for actions of other people. Naming it becomes most importantly. And number 5, I'm going to tell you, shift from emotions to evidence-based decision making. Ask, what are the constant behaviors, not the promises that I'm witnessing, right? So the clinical growth happens when behavior outweighs the hope, right? That means that when you are seeing behavior change, then you can attach hope to behavior change. Don't attach the hope to the promises. Now, I know I went over a lot, and I know I took the time to make sure that you all understood these, but toxic relationships don't survive because people are weak. Toxic relationships survive because the mind is powerful, attachment is deep, and leaving requires more than awareness. It requires strategy, support, and courage. So remember, love should not require you to lose yourself to keep someone else. This is Dr. Gary O. White, and I hope you enjoyed this segment, understanding why people remain in toxic relationships. So if you're in one, take the recommendations I have. And when you do, when you're on the other end, we'll gather together, revisit what you did, how it works, and then we'll toast.